Good afternoon. We're going to get started. And just as a reminder, we are recording this session, and so it will be posted to our website in a few days. My name is Harriet Kendall. I'm the Director of Housing and Residence Life here at William & Mary.
And my name is Laura Smith. I'm the Senior Housing Coordinator here at William & Mary.
So today we're going to go through just some reminders, things that are coming up. A lot of this information's already been shared via email and on our website, but this is also a time that at the end of the information that we're going to share today, that you'll be able to ask us some questions too. If we don't get to all the questions today, that's okay. You'll still be able to send us questions to our emails and to our myroom@wm.edu account, and we'll get responses to you that way also. So we're going to go ahead and start going through each slide and going from there.
So first off, people ask us, why should I live on campus? Students tell us that they find it convenient. They do find that sense of community. It does have an inclusivity of housing costs, such as utilities plus the rent. Students have statistically shown to improve satisfaction with college and also find a stronger connection with their faculty.
So as you all know, we are in the process of modernizing and updating our residential facilities and our dining spaces. And so in the last 3 years, that process has been underway, and you can see the impact on campus. We have 5 new buildings opening next fall, along with a newly renovated upperclassmen hall. Monroe Hall reopened this past fall, and that has all been a part of our 10-year plan, where we're renovating or replacing up to 80% of our housing inventory, and hoping to meet the needs of current students and future students of William & Mary. Again, this fall, we're opening up over 1,000 beds. And so I know a lot of the questions have been that, will we have enough housing? And with 2 of our areas closing next year, we're also bringing on 5 new buildings and a renovated building. So over 1,000 beds will come online next year.
So who's eligible for the room selection process? Students must be currently enrolled, full-time undergraduates or graduate students for the spring of 2025 semester, or already be readmitted for the fall of 2025 semester to be able to apply for housing during the returning student room selection process. Our current spring study away students are also eligible to go through the returning student room selection process. There is a 2-year live-on requirement for students in their first 2 years after high school graduation. They are required to live on campus at that time. This means that if you graduate from high school in 2024, you're required to live on campus not only this current year, but also next year.
So the 2-year live-on requirement, a lot of times there are questions about for traditional transfers and if this impacts their requirement of living on. So if you transferred in this year, traditional transfers, you're not required to live on. Pathway transfers, yes. So if you transferred in last spring as a pathway student, then you would be required to live on this year, but not your next year. And so it all just depends on when you transferred in to campus. And so just keeping those things in mind.
So what's new for 25-26? Old Dominion Hall is reopening for full renovation, and that's going to be allocated to returning students. For Westwood's 1 halls, it's a combination of returning and first years. Maple, Oak, and the 3rd and 4th floor of Pine are all returning, with Pine 1st and 2nd and Poplar halls being first year students. In our Jamestown Triangle, it's going to be open for a combination of returning and first year students, with returning students in Hardy Hall and first year students in Cedar and Lemon. Also, Chandler is going to be opening as a first year hall this coming year. And Bryan Complex is going back to all returning students for 25-26. Randolph Complex and the Green and Gold Village will close at the end of this current academic year. And we're also excited to have out there that the language houses will be relocated to Pine Hall 4th floor, and it will then become the Global Village. We're also very excited that we're bringing back same room sign up this time.
So room selection, general dates and deadlines, these are really, really important. So obviously you have gotten the emails and you saw that today, January 8th, we're having this information session. But some of the bigger dates is January 21st is when the 2025-26 housing application and contract will go live. It will go live at that morning, and then you'll have until February 11th by 5 p.m. to sign your housing contract and submit your housing application. So that means that you can log in anytime between the 21st of January and February 11th to sign your housing contract. Make sure that you have it done by 5 p.m. February 11th, because that is the most important time so that you are eligible for room sign up, and that you'll be assigned a time slot for traditional room selection. This also impacts if you are potentially applying for a living learning community, if you have a disability need, it all impacts in making sure that you have signed your housing contract by 5 p.m. February 11th. And then also with that, February 11th by 5 p.m. is also the same room sign up completed. And so if you're in a room in an upperclassmen building right now, or a building that's going to become upperclassmen, and you love your room right now, you will have until 5 p.m. February 11th to complete your housing contract, fill the room, and assign the room to you and your roommates, whoever are going into that unit with you, and have that all done by the 11th of February. So that means that you could be completely done with your room selection by February 11th that day. And then February 17th is another very, very important date. So the room selection will then begin on the 17th. This means that you have signed your application on February 11th by 5 p.m. and you have been assigned your time slot. And so your time slot will range depending on what category you fall into. But then on the 17th, that is when those begin. And so those dates are really, really important. And so just keeping that all in mind.
So as talked about, the contract due date selection order. So all students who wish to live on campus must sign that housing contract by 5 p.m. on February 11th. Time slots, which go out on the February 13th during traditional week, are based on high school graduation year. Rising seniors will go first to choose their rooms during traditional selection, followed by rising seniors and rising sophomores. Just remember, we work on those time slots based on high school graduation year, not social class, not credit hour, academic standing. And we look forward to working with students going through that process.
So late contracts. So if you somehow missed the 5 p.m. deadline on February 11th, this is what this would mean, is that if you missed your contract and let's say you log in at 6:01 on February 11th that day, you would not be assigned a time slot to select housing. But what that means is that after room selection has occurred and gone forward, residence life staff, the assignments team, will then go in and assign you to a bed space based on space and availability, providing that there's not an active housing wait list. And so if you miss the deadline, it means that the residence life staff most likely would then go in and assign you housing after everyone else who signed their housing contracts by the 11th at 5 p.m. have gone through and done their housing selection. If there is an active housing wait list at the time a student signs a housing contract, they would be placed on a wait list. However, we are really excited that unlikely we'll have a wait list this year. And if we do, it wouldn't be a significant wait list that we have seen in the last several years. And we feel that we would be able to have everyone off the wait list before the end of the academic year. And so we are excited for that. And so just keep that in mind. It is important for you to sign your housing application by that deadline, that timeline on the 5th of the 11th, by 5 p.m. on the 11th, sorry.
So considerations for the William & Mary Residence Life Housing Contract. The reminder, once submitted, contracts are binding. Prior to occupancy, the contract must be signed and dated or electronically accepted as evidence of acceptance of the terms, conditions, and regulations stated in the contract. And at the time of the contract, if the student is not 18 years old, a parent or legal guardian of the student will be required to co-sign the contract. Failure to check in, pick up a key, or occupy the assigned space does not release a student from the contract. And failure to participate in room selection, check in, pick up a key, or occupy that space does not release the student. And if for some reason there is a wait list and students sign their contract after that 5 p.m. on February 11th, they would be placed behind students on the wait list who met that contract deadline.
So the period of contract, so this is like any other contract, any kind of lease that you would sign, whether it's on campus or off campus, is that this contract is binding for the 25-26 academic year, specifically the fall and spring semester. So just like this year, same timeline, unless otherwise terminated or suspended under the terms and conditions of the contract. I would encourage you, when the housing contract goes live on the 21st of January, to really read through the housing contract itself. Because if you are an upperclassman, a rising junior or senior, and you're contemplating whether you're wanting to live on campus or live off campus, I really encourage you to read the housing contract and what that means by signing it, and what those contract terms mean. Because we don't want you to sign a housing contract and then sign a lease and then potentially be bound to 2 different housing contracts. And so just keep that in mind as you're deciding whether you're wanting to live on or off campus as an upperclassman. The dates of occupancy are obviously the academic calendar year, and those are always published on our website. So those who sign their contract after 5 p.m. on Tuesday, February 11th will be added to the wait. Like Laura said, if there is a wait list, they would be added to a wait list behind those who met the initial contract date. But again, we don't anticipate a significant wait list compared to previous years. But I just really encourage you all to read your contract. I know it's a lot of verbiage and it can take time sometimes to read through, but we want you to all have the most available information at the time of you making a decision.
So cancellation of contract prior to occupancy. University policy requires freshmen and sophomore by high school graduation year to live on campus unless an individual exception is granted. Students who are not required to live on campus have a limited period from contract acceptance to request to cancel their housing contract, including a short period that's available with no penalty. After a student's contract cancellation period is ended, the students who have signed the William & Mary Residence Life housing contract for the 25-26 academic year will owe and be charged full room fees. Any termination of the William & Mary Residence Life housing contract subject to the terms and conditions is listed in the contract that qualify the resident for a refund or adjustment of room fees owed. And if Residence Life is unable to provide a fall semester room assignment by August 1st of 2025, the student may request cancellation of the contract with no penalty. The cancellation policy does not apply to freshmen and sophomore by high school graduation year housing assignments. So that contract cancellation process periods, we've got listed up here. Cancellation schedule is for contracts signed through February 11th, 2025. Through that date, there's no penalty. If you're not required to live on campus, you can request a cancellation. If you request a cancellation between February 12th and February 26th, there's a $750 penalty. If you request a cancellation between February 27th through March 12th of 2025, there's a $1,500 penalty. After March 12th, for people who sign their contracts through February 11th, there is no option to request to cancel. So for contracts that are signed after February 11th of 2025, between 1 to 2 business days, there's no penalty to request to cancel. Between 3 and 10 business days, $750 penalty to request to cancel. And then between 11 and 20 business days, it's $1,500 penalty to cancel. After that 20th business day, the contract cancellation process is not available.
I would also just remind students too that we have had penalties, but they have not really been in effect the past several years because we've had an extensive wait list. But knowing that we most likely won't have an extensive wait list means that our penalties would be back in place. And so just to think about that as you consider living on or off campus, as you think through housing for next year. With that, again, with a wait list, we don't anticipate a significant wait list for the 25-26 academic year. Again, if one does occur, we've successfully managed a wait list for on-campus housing in the past, eventually offering housing to all students that remained on the list by end of late July. If we did have a wait list this year, we don't anticipate it again to be significant like previous years. And so we would update students as soon as we know if there'll be a wait list or not, as soon as once all housing contracts are in by the 11th of February, you would know within a day or two if you were waitlisted or not. But we would also share out the information of how big is that wait list? What does that look like to help students make decisions that they would maybe need to make? Again, if you want more information on the housing wait list, we have an entire webpage dedicated to that information and the process. This link is also in the emails that you've received over the last few months too from our assignments team. And so just keeping those things in mind also.
So contract release exemptions, students are able to submit these requests via the housing portal and the housing application. A release may be granted only to students who demonstrate in writing and with supporting documentation an unforeseen change in circumstances that cannot be resolved in campus housing. Requests are considered on a case-by-case basis and releases are not guaranteed. And if a release is approved, the student may receive a refund as outlined per the withdrawal schedule and refunds as listed in the undergraduate course catalog once a checkout is complete. And release request decisions are final. Just as a note, the contract release exemption process is separate from the contract cancellation process. If you have filled out the housing contract and your housing contract cancellation period has expired, you can go back to your housing application and review these contract release categories and see if one applies to you. And if it does, submit that request there on your application along with the appropriate documentation.
So same room sign up, we are really excited to have this back. We've not been able to do same room sign up for the past 3 years. So bringing it back this year is exciting. And I know a lot of students are excited to have this option also. And so it's returning for this academic year. And so students are able to return to the same unit, so room, suite, or apartment, if your space meets the necessary requirements on our website. And again, you can link from the email that was sent to you from my room and see what buildings same room sign up qualifies for, but you're able to see if your current space is eligible. And what that means is that providing you sign your housing application by February 11th, and the people that you're wanting to live with have all signed their room contracts by the 11th, that means that you would all be able to assign to that unit. So whether that's a double, a suite, an apartment, providing that you fill all the spaces in the unit, you would be able to secure your same room sign up. Again, that does have to be completed by by 5 p.m. on February 11th. And so keeping that in mind, if that's an option that you're wanting to look at, I would highly suggest looking at if your building or your room or your floor is eligible for that. And then you can start kind of planning your room selection based off of that. We're also going to have a same room sign up guide uploaded to our website. And so under our selection page for room selection on the website, for each process, there is actually a room selection guide that you're able to kind of look at and for those steps and how to process through that. I always suggest reading those prior to going into room selection so you have an idea of what you're wanting to do. And also just because you haven't done it potentially since either last spring or last June. And so just kind of having that refresher is helpful sometimes.
Okay, so we're going to move on to disability accommodations. Disability accommodations in housing are not automatically renewed for each academic year, and they must be requested and approved each academic year through student accessibility services. And to ensure the processing of accommodation requests prior to room selection, students should submit all requests for accommodation and associated documentation to the Student Accessibility Services Office by no later than February 3rd of 2025. They are currently accepting those requests and documentation now. We've already seen some approvals come across. Please don't wait till the last minute because you'll have to schedule an appointment with them. But please definitely have that in by February 3rd, 2025 if you're seeking that early accommodation selection period.
So just like disability accommodations, the religious accommodations are not they have to be renewed each year and it's case by case. The requests for religious accommodations are reviewed by committee, and then to ensure processing of the accommodation request prior to room selection, you want to make sure that you have submitted that by February 3rd. Again, it's linked in our emails on our website on how to submit that. If this is something that you had this year, you do need to resubmit for next year. And if it's something that you're contemplating for next year, whether you want to use it or not, I would highly suggest having your submission submitted by February 3rd, because that gives the committee time to review. And then also for them to communicate with you whether you're approved or not approved, because then that helps you plan for your housing selection also. Just like a disability accommodation, you receive a letter, and that will kind of guide through what you're being approved for. And it just define whether you're being approved based on the accommodation and space that you requested and what you're eligible for and when your room selection would be.
The next is gender inclusive housing. Residence Life is committed to offering gender inclusive housing options to ensure inclusive communities. We offer gender-based preference options for students to meet their individual needs. That includes single gender housing. We're having roommates, suite mates, apartment mates who all have the same sex as listed in Banner. And then gender inclusive housing, having roommates, suite mates, apartment mates of any gender or gender expression or identity in your unit. Just remember, gender inclusive housing is about who you specifically want to live with, not what building or room type you want to live in. Students selecting gender inclusive housing should plan to live with a roommate. There are no singles in gender inclusive housing. So for eligibility, students must be 18 years of age at the time of the request. Each individual student must be eligible for on-campus housing. Groups and living units cannot mix undergraduate and graduate students in gender inclusive housing. With those eligibility requirements, if the student is under 18 and they have questions about how we can best meet their needs regarding gender-based housing, they should just reach out to us, please. As soon as they identify a need, have them email myroom@wm.edu so we can see what options or opportunities may be available. If you're looking for a specific list of buildings with or without gender inclusive options, that is listed under gender inclusive housing on our website. We're very specific if the building is all gender inclusive or part of it, or not eligible at all. Also a reminder, students accepted into living learning communities such as Africana House, Mosaic House, Global Village, and students with disability and religious accommodations are also eligible for gender inclusive housing.
Living learning communities, we have a variety of living learning communities for upperclassmen. So we have the Africana House that's located in Landrum Hall on the first floor. We have Mosaic House that is located in Hardy second floor. And then we have the Global Village, which was formerly known as the Language Houses, which is currently split between Landrum and Hardy Hall. This will be all shifting to Pine Hall on fourth floor and will be known as the Global Village moving forward. Those all have separate deadlines that you will need to submit to those individual campus partners. And so Friday, January 31st is the deadline for submitting the Africana House, the Mosaic House, and the Global Village applications to those advisors/programs. That's a really important time if that is something that you are truly interested in being a part of, because each program has a different approach on how they interview and how they select students into those houses or those programs. And so keeping that in mind, because again, you want to know whether you are accepted into one of those or not. And then it helps you kind of guide of where you want to potentially live next year and your decision making. But just know that you want to have that all submitted. You can find all of their applications linked from our housing website, or you can go directly to those programs' websites also to find the links on how to apply for those.
Finally, one of the big questions we get every year, are there singles for sophomores? So single rooms are rarely available to sophomores during the room selection process, especially during traditional week. Singles sometimes become available during the academic year, and sophomores can submit a room change request form. That does open this year in June, at the very beginning of June. So if you're not able to secure a single and you still kind of like one, you can request that on the room change request form that opens for next year in June of 25.
So that is a lot of information that we have thrown at you, and we know it's a lot of things to process. But again, a lot of this information is in your email or on our website. But if you have questions, we're happy to answer questions now if there are things that we can help guide with now. And then if we don't get to all of them, again, you're able to email myroom@wm.edu for follow-up questions. Or if there are things that you realize afterwards that you wanted to ask, then just go ahead and email us at that email and we'll be happy to do that.
So there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. The first one is, when will floor plans for the new dorms opening be on the Residence Life website? We're actively working on those right now. I believe that Old Dominion and Cedar are currently up. We're working on West Woods at this time, but those should all be up by the 21st of January.
The next question, this is more a question for actually SAS, as we only get the letters that you all get, of whether you're approved or not for an accommodation. I think it depends on the accommodation that's being requested that would potentially need or not need updated paperwork. And so that would really be a question that we would want you all to follow up with SAS and ask, because again, I think it is a case by case basis and depending on the situation. But again, we will get a letter from SAS when you get your approved letter, and it will tell us the things that we need to know to help guide and where we would assign you for your time slot based on that accommodation letter and what you would actually also see during your room selection.
Next question I see is, if I need to find a roommate, will the portal within the lifestyle questionnaire we used incoming freshmen be available to me as a rising sophomore? And the answer is yes. The process is exactly the same.
So roughly, I want to say, Lauren, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but roughly around 600 beds will be coming offline at the end of this academic year between two complexes. With
That's
that, we have over 900 beds opening in the Westwoods area, about 200 beds opening in the Jamestown Triangle area, and bringing on Old Dominion back online adds another 130 beds.
So the next question was, will the lifestyle questionnaire and portal open on the same day as the housing contract? The housing contract contains the lifestyle questionnaire and the contract, along with other pages. So if you go into the housing portal on the 21st of January after 9 a.m., you will see the housing application there. And within the application, you'll fill out that lifestyle questionnaire.
Are there other questions? Because we are happy to answer questions you may have right now. If those are all the questions, then again, if you have other questions that come up after, or even during your process when you are in the process of completing your housing application or in the process of room selection, know that you can reach out to myroom@wm.edu, and our staff will get back to you and answer your questions that you may have. If you even later today realize that you wanted to ask something, you are definitely able to ask those questions via email. And then it looks like we had one more question come in and we'll answer that. And then after that, we'll conclude this. And again, we'll upload this to our website. So if there are things that you wanted to go back and listen to, it will be on our website at that time also.
The last question we had was, are all halls in Westwoods all hall style? So there is a mix of suites where it's 2 bedrooms attached by a bathroom, but the majority of the spaces over there are bedrooms where the door opens to the hall. But the wonderful thing about Westwoods 1 is the bathrooms are all single use only. So you go into a pod that has bathrooms, and each bathroom has its own door. And behind the door is a sink, a toilet, and a shower. So we call those single use only bathrooms. So makes the whole floor eligible for gender inclusive housing. But it's not that group style bathroom, community bathroom like you would have such in Barrett. It's much more like what we have in Hardy and Lemon.
So those are all the questions we had come in. Thank you all for joining us today. And again, if you have other questions that come up, please feel free to send us questions and we will go from there. Thanks all.
Thank you.